And I was just wondering, does he think that there are still inequalities nonetheless, regardless of the importance of women? Are there still inequalities? And is it important to address those inequalities so that the tradition can adapt to the changes in society? Thank you.
There are also some aspects in Buddhism that are not entirely equal. For example, when it comes to caring for the family and loved ones, women are different from men. They tend to be more sensitive and often feel especially anxious about many things. Of course, this doesn't apply to all women, but there are actually quite a few women, in fact, who are more prone to feelings of jealousy. When it comes to the people around them, even small disputes can be quite frequent. Therefore, in certain Buddhist scriptures, there is particular emphasis and attention placed on women, highlighting some faults that are unique to women compared to men. Just like in our worldly organizations, there is a saying among people in the world, as the saying goes, that wherever there are women, there tends to be more gossip and disputes. But I don't know if this is the case in the West. This saying is also common in Han Chinese regions. Therefore, in response to these situations, Buddhism in some early scriptures describes the mentality of women as having more and coarser afflictions, especially in general, in particular, which is different from men. Especially when facing the same problem, women have an advantage in that they react immediately. When she sees a picture or a pitiful person, she immediately feels a genuine sense of compassion. This is truly her strength, but there are also some shortcomings. Men tend to be slightly more generous and generally not as quick to react, whereas women often tend to be quite emotional. In a very short time, they can become fixated on very small issues, becoming especially attached and unable to let go. As a result, they often experience suffering. This situation is quite common. Regarding her earlier question, some people say that in Buddhism, in certain pure lands, there are no women. They claim this is unfair and unreasonable in Buddhism. There are indeed such opinions, but in fact, this view is one-sided. Because in Buddhism, there are many scriptures that describe different pure lands. Some pure lands are said to have no women, and such statements do exist. But there are also some pure lands in Buddhism. For example, in certain pure lands like Udayana, there are actually many dakinis. According to Buddhist scriptures, it's just like a world of women. As for men, except for a very few truly great and accomplished masters, they are incredibly rare. So when we describe Buddhist teachings, we should probably be a bit more comprehensive in order to be thorough, considering both the early and later periods, since there are different scriptures from each period. Only when we understand them all can we see that it is truly an integrated and unified philosophy in its essence. Now, some people say that in certain Buddhist monasteries for male monastics, women not allowed to enter. They say this is unfair to women, this kind of statement, but I don't see it that way. From my perspective, in some nunneries in China, and perhaps abroad as well, it's the same situation. Generally, men are not allowed to enter women's monastic communities. This situation also exists, including in worldly life. There are certain girls' schools where boys are not allowed to go, and only female students may attend, including when I go to some prisons to give lectures. In some men's prisons, women are generally not allowed to enter, often for security reasons. In women's prisons, except for a few individuals, generally men are not allowed in. So in our world, there are really quite a few various different situations. But these different situations cannot represent the entirety of thought as a whole. I think it's not just Buddhism, but also Christianity and Islam, as well as other religions such as these. As far as I know, some of these are actually perhaps caused by our history, but some are indeed due to religious practices and specific rituals which are held for certain groups. At such times, we should have a broader wisdom to fully understand the situation. This is meaningful for religion, and even more so for human history. I often think that, on one hand, we humans in the 21st century need a more open world. In this era of the global village, we need to understand many different cultures from both the East and the West, all around the world. At the same time, each of us has The history and heritage of thousands of years of human civilization, along with these traditions, are something we need and have a responsibility to understand, preserve, and protect. Because all of us here are people of this era, and we have certain tasks in our hands, passed down from the previous generation. Many traditions have been handed down to us over time. If we do not pass them on and only blindly pursue modern culture and scientific knowledge, it is very likely that the history of humanity will already have been broken in our time. In that case, each of us would be judged a sinner by history.
My question for Khenpo is, he made many observations about men and women in a family context, but for men and women who are embarking on a Dharma-centered life, so who become ordained, for example, I wonder if in Khenpo's experience, in that case where people have renounced family life, if he notices any difference in the minds of men and women, or if it's just the differences are just social when people have a family.
The differences between men and women after ordination. In the Vinaya Sutra that we have studied previously, there is a text called the Root Vinaya. There is such a Vinaya text. At the very beginning of this ancient Vinaya text, it talks about male monastics, their mindset before they first ordained, the situation when they receive ordination, and after receiving the precepts, how they uphold the novice and bhikshu precepts, and finally, how he relies on the Vinaya to attain liberation. This is explained very clearly. After that, it discusses the female monastics. It talks about Shramanarika and Bhikkhuni. It also explains the methods for them to receive the precepts, both before and after ordination. After receiving the precepts, how not to break them and even further enhance them. So among them, for example, as a whole, at the very beginning, a certain mindset arises, the aspiration to attain liberation from the cycle of rebirth in the three realms. Ordination is not about my own happiness or enjoyment. The fundamental point is renunciation. Then, based on the mind of renunciation, each person upholds the precepts within the Vinaya according to what the Buddha taught, observing different precepts as prescribed. If we were to discuss the differences among them in detail, it would indeed take a very long time.
My question is that there are a lot of obstacles that we encounter to our patients, that try our patience. How can we get past those to increase compassion and to bring about bodhicitta? Thank you.
Such compassion and the generation of bodhicitta, in fact, compassion has two levels of meaning. Loving kindness is the wish for all sentient beings to attain happiness. This is a kind of mindset, and compassion is the removal or alleviation of suffering. This is thoroughly explained in the Buddhist treatise Mahaprajnaparamita Shastra. There is such an analysis of these terms and their distinctions. One is to be free from suffering, the other is to attain happiness. Actually, these two indeed have similarities in many ways, but we need to arouse bodhicitta through compassion. The level of bodhicitta is actually even higher, to enable all sentient beings in the world to attain enlightenment, to help them truly understand the reality of all things. This is the kind of aspiration we should have. First, we need to understand the importance of compassion and bodhicitta. Then, we need to discover how it can arise in our own minds by taking the bodhisattva vows or making the aspiration, and then continuously refining it, constantly elevating it. In this way, this compassionate bodhicitta will not easily fade from our minds, because compassion and bodhicitta, according to the profound teachings of Maitreya's treatises, as explained in detail, some of us are naturally born with compassion for others, but some people, through later education, gradually develop and cultivate it over time. So everyone's situation is not exactly the same. However, generally speaking, having a strong sense of compassion for every sentient being is the most crucial condition.
Respected teacher, as a lay practitioner, what I am most anxious about is how should I educate the next generation so that they can preserve their innate compassion. On the path ahead, they may encounter all kinds of different problems or difficulties that we encounter or obstacles. As a mother, as an elder, how should I protect and support them on this path of spiritual practice so that they can consistently maintain compassion and bodhicitta? I asked the teacher, please, to give me some guidance.
In this world, there is a kind of compassion that we believe is a spiritual quality that never expires. It is extremely, extremely valuable. In fact, its value greatly exceeds, especially when compared to what we call money, status, and so on. So how can such compassion and loving kindness be passed down? The key is whether our family values it or not. If we place great importance on it, then for our own children and for our relatives and friends around us, there are ways through various means to help them frequently give rise to this compassionate bodhicitta in life. For some people, this kind of mindset may have an immediate and obvious impact for some people, but for others, it might not happen right away. No matter what, the spread of this kind of education is subtle and imperceptible, yet it has a direct effect. After this, I think our concern for the next generation is indeed very important. For example, many of us often say, my grandmother, my grandfather did good deeds, even if they didn't tell us directly. Their own personal example, their actions and behavior, and if they have some particular special beliefs and a unique sense of compassion, then for children, naturally. This is called education by example. The impression left by personal example is even more unforgettable for them. Therefore, as a family, as a united family, I don't know how things are here in Canada, but in China, for example, many children often spend most of their time at school and very little time with their parents. If that's the case, the education that children receive at school may not always truly be an education of love and compassion. Therefore, parents have the important responsibility to spend even more time and use various ways to pass on love to their children.
At the same time, my daughter also has some questions she would like to ask the teacher.
How can one become a Buddha faster?
My daughter's question is, how can one become a Buddha faster?
Secondly, answering the child's question, you have to work very hard. You must practice with unwavering faith that never changes and with great dedication in order to truly become a Buddha. But I don't know if it will be quick, because attaining Buddhahood is a tremendous task that depends on your diligence.
Right now, I am always contemplating and listening, attending lectures, reading some sutras, and participating in some Dharma assemblies. I now have a deep understanding of the suffering of life. Although my life is quite stable, I feel that there really isn't much happiness in life. I truly have developed renunciation. But right now, my merit is insufficient and the conditions are not yet ripe. I've always thought if my parents have both passed away, I've had this wish for 10 years now. If by then my conditions have matured, that might be when I'm 50 or 60 years old. By that time, my child will have grown up and become independent and I can become a monastic. At that time, if I ordain, if I go to Larunga Buddhist Academy, I wonder, will I actually have that karmic connection or not? For me personally.
How old are you right now?
Well, I'm 50 years old now.
50 years old, ordain in your 50s or 60s. Shouldn't you be ordaining now, right?
I still can't ordain yet. Conditions aren't ready because my child is still young.
Oh.
At the very least, realistically, it will be 10 years from now.
Well, who knows? Let's see when the time comes, because after 10 years, I don't even know where I'll be.
You don't really know where you'll be, given the current situation at Larunga Academy, actually. Do you currently accept students, for those such as individuals over 60 years old? Is it possible for them to enter your academy?
Right now, yes, but in the future, well, I don't know.
You really don't know about the future?
Okay, all right.
All right, thank you.
In the history of Buddhism, we could see that Tibetan Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism developed quite independently. Now in Larungar, Chinese and Tibetan monks and nuns come together to study and practice. And I understand that Chinese practitioners learn Tibetan texts. I would like to know whether Tibetans now are also studying scriptures that were more important in Chinese Buddhism, like the Garland Sutra or the Lotus Sutra. So whether Tibetans are now adapting and practicing and studying Chinese sutras.
Perhaps not. Let me explain this a bit more. As everyone knows, Tibetan Buddhism and Chinese Buddhism are, from a historical perspective, considered to be two different systems, each with its own unique development and background. Moreover, the history of Buddhism in the Han region is actually even longer than that of Tibet. But one thing we have to acknowledge is that historically, the Han regions have never had a lineage of learning passed down from generation to generation in the same way as in Tibet. Moreover, this tradition of oral transmission has always been quite rare. It may exist, but it is rather uncommon. So up to the present day, although there are some very large temples in the Han region, and many people go there to burn incense and worship the Buddha, this is quite common. But systematic study, apart from a few specialized Buddhist academies and institutions, is actually rather rare and uncommon. So, as a result, many lay people, as well as monastics from the Han region, come to the academy to study. They need to study both Han Chinese Buddhism and also learn the principles of Tibetan Buddhism. This has been the case for nearly 20 years now. Currently here at our place, there are many Han Chinese Khenpos, Khenmos, and Dharma teachers. A great number of Han Chinese have been trained here. However, they are given titles in the Tibetan tradition. This is quite common. As for Tibetans, although they also understand Han Chinese Buddhism, because scriptures like the Diamond Sutra and the Lotus Sutra, these are all included in the Tibetan Tripitaka. Moreover, in the Tibetan Tripitaka, these are actually not particularly difficult teachings of the exoteric tradition. Therefore, there is no special need to go to the Han region or to seek out individual eminent monks in the Han region to request teachings. Such phenomena do not exist because the tradition of teaching and practice has been relatively well preserved in Tibet. As for the preaching and teaching of the Dharma in the Han region, because of historical reasons, it has not been particularly flourishing. So now many people from the Han tradition are studying the Tibetan tradition, which actually also has some historical reasons behind it, as well as some slightly more traditional reasons.
I am just a really very simple person, but in fact humanity is very complicated. So whenever I reach a certain level in my own personal practice, I often encounter very malicious people who attack me. But I neither take any special precautions nor do I actively defend myself. When people attack me, I just ignore it. But they still keep pestering me. I don't know how to handle these kinds of things. Because there's nowhere left to hide, but it still keeps happening. I don't know how to turn this adversity around. Thank you.
In the past, the renowned scientist Einstein once said, to live a simple life, whether it's spiritually or in other aspects of life, is very advantageous for us in our daily lives. You just said that you are a simple person. Actually, living a simple life is a very good thing. Because simple food, simple clothing, and a simple lifestyle, it won't put a lot of pressure on others. If we set our standards of living too high, we may never be able to reach that level. It's like an athlete who has very high aspirations. If he wants to do the high jump, he may never actually be able to truly surpass it. So I think being a simple person and living a simple life, for ordinary people like us and for many of us in our daily lives, this is really necessary. Of course, this society, this world is quite complicated, but this kind of complexity for someone who is simple, it should be neither beneficial nor harmful in any way. Even if there are some adverse circumstances or some opposition directed at me, we should try our best to dissolve them as if they never existed. As a matter of fact, many adversities in this world are often caused by our own minds or actions. If you simply treat them as if they don't exist, many things will also disappear. So I think if you say you are a simple person, then with a simple and clear mindset, when you treat these problems, when you treat them as something very simple, they will disappear in a simple way.
I'm very sorry, but we are out of time. thank you so much, Khenpo, on behalf of McGill University, and thank you all so much for coming. And also thank you so much for your marvelous interpretation. We could not have done this without you. It was wonderful. Thank you so much.